Off the breaking news this morning. An explosive set of text messages underscoring what this impeachment inquiry is all about. U.S. diplomats appearing to have offered a White House visit to the president of Ukraine in exchange for an investigation into the 2016 election and into Joe Biden and his son Hunter. The messages were revealed by Kurt Volker, who until recently was in the State Department, a special envoy to the Ukraine. A senior Ukrainian aide even told Volker they had plans to announce the investigation and the visit. We're quoting here. "Once we have a date, we'll call for a press briefing announcing upcoming visit and outlining vision for the reboot of U.S.-Ukraine relationship, including, among other things, Burisma and election meddling in investigations." Burisma, of course, is the Ukrainian gas company that put Joe Biden's son Hunter on its board. Another text highlights what appear to be deep reservations coming from a senior U.S. diplomat as he refers to hundreds of millions of dollars in crucial U.S. military aid to Ukraine being withheld at the time of these demands. Quote, "Are we now saying that security assistance and White House meeting are conditioned on investigations?" The response to that text? Call me. As in, let's quickly get this off the record. This is all happening as the president openly admits to enlisting other countries to investigate his political rivals. As my reporting shows, not for the first time. In fact, he raised the Bidens on a phone call with China in June, and a source now says that the White House may argue they do not have to provide any documents on all this to Congress until the House formally votes to hold the impeachment inquiry. That's their draft response to Democrats threatening to subpoena documents. There does not appear to be any constitutional basis to that stonewalling. This morning, the intelligence community's Inspector General is returning to Capitol Hill. Remember, he is the one who originally delivered that whistleblower complaint to Congress. Let's begin there with CNN congressional reporter Lauren Fox. Clearly the dynamic of this has changed because the administration's attacks on this whistleblower and the claims and the complaint seem to have been blown up by text messages corroborating the elements of that complaint. How does this play out on the Hill today?
That right. Well, the behind the closed door testimony from Michael Atkinson, the ICIG, that we expect in just a little over an hour, Jim, is certainly going to shed light on both those text messages and the complaint itself. If you remember, this is the first time the House Intelligence Committee is going to be able to question the ICIG since this complaint has been released publicly. We also know that this is not Atkinson's first time on the Hill. Last week he met with the Senate Intelligence Committee. Today is going to be a meeting with the House Intelligence Committee. But I am telling you that Democrats are eager to learn a lot more about who in the administration knew what and when. That is going to be the thrust of their questioning today. Meanwhile, Republicans, I'm told, are going to be trying to question the credibility of this whistleblower. They want to understand exactly what the whistleblower complaint knew and exactly why the whistleblower and what kind of knowledge they had exactly about whether this was firsthand, secondhand. If you remember, Republicans have been arguing that this person was just relying on hearsay. Of course, Democrats are pushing back on that, saying every document they have is just confirming more and more of this whistleblower complaint. Today is also the deadline, of course, for Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, to turn over documents to Capitol Hill. Jim?
Another consequential day on Capitol Hill. Lauren Fox, we know you'll be there. Thanks very much. Sources are telling CNN that the president's son-in-law and acting chief of staff will head up the White House response to the impeachment inquiry. CNN senior Washington correspondent Joe Johns, he is following the latest from the White House. And Joe, there had been talk about a Clinton-like war room. That seemed to go by the wayside. For a while, it seemed like the president was his own war room on this. But now it seems like there is a plan in place to push back, a team in place.
Right. That's still, I would say, a work in progress. Jared Kushner, by the way, was one of the people who didn't think a war room would be a good idea, despite the fact that the Clintons did it back in the 1990s. But what we do know is that this team that is working on this is expected to also try to put together a timeline, if you will, a chronology of all the events leading up to that July 25th call between the President of the United States and the President of Ukraine. Of course, this is legal due diligence, if you will, in trying to unravel the nature of the relationship between foreign governments, and the White House counsel's office is involved, along with the Situation Room, as they try to put together a record of all the calls that were made. Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, along with the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner are the people who are said to be leading that effort. So the other thing that's important to say is that it's pretty clear in one form or another the White House is going to go after the issue of process up on Capitol Hill, specifically no vote for this impeachment inquiry. As you said at the top, it's not constitutionally mandated, but could be a problem if the Democrats have to go to court to try to dislodge documents or depositions. Back to you.
Yeah, so White House has not been reluctant to go to court on a whole host of requests from Congress. Joe Johns at the White House, thanks very much. You've heard for the last several days questions from the president about the whistleblower complaint, questions from his surrogates undermining it. Well, now we have text messages from officials in this administration involved in dealings with Ukraine. Take a look at these text messages. Here is CNN's national correspondent Suzanne Malveaux.
3 House committees releasing an avalanche of new evidence after former U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, met behind closed doors with investigators for more than 9 hours. House Democrats releasing text messages provided by Volker showing President Trump wanted Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky to agree to launch investigations into former Vice President Joe Biden before meeting with the newly elected leader. Volker texting Ukraine's top diplomat, Andrei Yermak, less than an hour before Trump's call with Zelensky, writing, "Heard from White House, assuming President Z convinces Trump he will investigate. Get to the bottom of what happened in 2016. We will nail down date for visit to Washington." According to President Trump last month,
there was never any quid pro quo.
But senior U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, Bill Taylor, questioning if that's the case. Texting on September 9th, "I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with the political campaign." More than 4 hours later, Ambassador Gordon Sondland responding, "I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear. No quid pro quos of any kind." The text messages also revealing just how involved Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, was in setting up the call between Trump and Zelensky. The whistleblower complaint alleging Volker held meetings with Giuliani, where in one, according to the Washington Post, he warned Giuliani against trusting information he was receiving from Ukrainian political figures about Biden and his son.
If Volker had said to me that my sources were incredible or wrong, any of them, I would have immediately said, "Did you do an investigation?" Because I really wanted them to.
Republicans insisting Volker's deposition showed no wrongdoing by the White House.
Not one thing he has said comports with any of the Democrats' impeachment narrative. Not one thing.
The administration is in an even stronger place today than they were this morning.
Earlier, President Trump making this stunning suggestion.
China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine.
And doubling down on Twitter despite his pending impeachment inquiry, writing he has an absolute right, perhaps even duty, to investigate or have investigated corruption. And that would include asking or suggesting other countries to help us out.
The president has confessed to his violation of his oath of office right there, then and there, so that don't need too much inquiry.
Folks, don't listen to the misinformation. Look at the facts. Look at the text. Suzanne Malveaux, thanks for your reporting. Let's talk about this now. CNN legal and national security analyst Asha Rangappa, CNN political analyst Molly Ball, and White House correspondent for Reuters Jeff Mason. Good morning to all of you. Asha, I want to begin with you. Let's highlight a couple of these texts. Let me start with this one. This one appearing to connect a meeting with the U.S. president to an announcement by the Ukrainians that they're looking in to the president's political opponent, or likely political opponent here. Here's one. This is coming from Taylor. He was a member of the team. Actually, this is from Kurt Volker, a member of the team for the president, in fact, his envoy. Assuming President Z convinces Trump he will investigate, get to the bottom of what happened in 2016, we will nail down date for visit to Washington. Good luck. See you tomorrow, Kurt. Is that a quid pro quo?
Yes. Not only is there a condition here of, having a meeting in exchange for doing something, I think that one thing we need to highlight is what they were looking for was a public announcement. Now, this is really what makes the lie of we're looking for corruption versus looking for dirt and help in the campaign. If you really want just someone, another country to investigate, they can do it quietly. You wait for the findings and then, let them take it on. What they wanted was a public announcement that would then, publicly cast doubt on Joe Biden in a way that would benefit Trump. And I think that need for them to be very public about this investigation that they were ostensibly starting really adds to this idea that he was looking for a personal benefit to his own campaign.
So that was one piece of leverage there, a meeting with the U.S. president. These meetings are important for countries such as Ukraine to show the strength of the relationship. Another piece of leverage, and this is really key, is U.S. military assistance to Ukraine. A reminder to our viewers, Ukraine is at war with Russia for 5 years. Russia's invaded the country. More than 13,000 Ukrainians have died. They continue to die there. So listen to this text here. This one comes from Bill Taylor, a longtime U.S. diplomat. Actually, this is not the right one. There's another one where he says, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. If we could put that text up on the screen there, because Jeff Mason, I want you to comment on that. This is another apparent quid pro quo here, is it not? Because the question had been, why was U.S. military assistance to Ukraine mandated by Congress? Why was it delayed in the days and weeks leading up to the presidential phone call with Ukraine? Does that text message indicate to you a quid pro quo on that military assistance?
Well, it indicates to me that there's a U.S. official who's asking that question. And so if you've got a U.S. official who thinks, look, this is a potential issue, this is a question mark, you've got to assume that the Ukrainians are potentially asking that question as well. Now, the president has said repeatedly there was no quid pro quo. The aid did end up going to Ukraine, but the fact that there's now evidence, number one, that was something that was being discussed, and question marks within the U.S. government about the reasoning is certainly more evidence for Congress to consider.
Well, and look at the response of Gary Sondland. He, by the way, is a Trump appointee, the U.S. ambassador to the EU, when this issue is raised again by Bill Taylor. This text coming in from Taylor, this on September 1st, November 2019. Are we now saying that security assistance and White House meeting are conditioned on investigations? The response from Sondland, call me. Now, Molly Ball, there's a very simple answer to that question via text if there is nothing to it. Absolutely not. We would never condition crucial military assistance on an investigation of a political opponent. Call me, which to me is the kind of thing you say when you want something off the record.
And the other text as well, where they come out with an explicit denial that there's a quid pro quo, indicates that there is some consciousness on the part of all of these officials that they're doing something, or they may be seen to be doing something improper, that they're not just sort of skipping down this path oblivious to the potential implications of what they're doing. And the military aid piece of it is what so alarmed particularly the Democrats in the national security community, saying we in Congress, by bipartisan majorities, approved this military aid for a reason, because our national security is at stake. And so the impression that the White House, that the administration were willing to violate America's national security interests in order to pursue this conspiracy theory is what has so troubled so many.
Ukraine's national security. Imagine you're Ukraine, a small country invaded by a very large Russia. You've had part of your country annexed by Russia 5 years ago, and your ally, the U.S., says, we're going to hold back this aid until you do this political favor for us. I want to repeat a text for you as well, Asha, on who benefits from all this. We talked about quid pro quo, so how about cui bono? Just to throw some Latin out there at you. This again from Bill Taylor. The nightmare is they give the interview and don't get the security assistance. The Russians love it, and I quit. I mean, this is a key point here. Russia benefits from this, does it not? The U.S. withholding aid from Ukraine as it's invaded by Russia.
Yes, I think that text to me stood out the most. So as you said, Jim, this is the United States standing there holding a lifesaver and then asking Ukraine to do a bunch of things. In legal terms, we would call this duress. You're placing someone under duress, under pressure to be able to do something in order to get something they urgently need or want. I think in this particular text, there's also the implication that look, Ukraine is expecting to get this lifesaver as soon as they do it. And I'm worried that they might not even get it then, and that this whole thing could be a big gift to Vladimir Putin. And so I think that you're right to highlight that. We don't want that part to get lost as well.
And folks, you're going to hear a lot of misinformation. You're going to hear a lot of partisan information attacks. Look at the text. It's in the text. And they were released, by the way, by a Trump appointee in sworn testimony. Listen, everyone stay with me. There's a lot more to analyze here. Still to come, the president's personal attorney wrapped up in these explosive new text messages between U.S. diplomats and a senior Ukrainian aide. We're going to go through it all. Plus, as President Trump is asking China to investigate his political rival Joe Biden, I'm learning this was not the first time that Biden has come up during the president's conversations with Chinese President Xi. And sources telling me about a prompt by President Trump show how a potential Ukrainian investigation into the 2016 election was linked to a desired meeting between the president of Ukraine and the president of the U.S. Those texts also underscore how Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, was directly and closely involved in setting up the July 25th phone call between the two leaders. Let's bring back our analysts here. So let's begin with this if we can, Molly. So the source telling CNN that this statement that was worked out, the Ukrainians basically saying, yeah, we're going to get into this investigation, reboot U.S.-Ukrainian relations, that was drafted by the Ukrainians, but it does appear that U.S. officials were highly involved in getting that message out. What's the significance of that?
Well, I think there's a lot of questions about Rudy Giuliani's role in this and how he interacted with the State Department, how he was involved in telling State Department officials what to do despite not being part of that official structure. There's questions about the legality of it. There's also questions about what exactly was his capacity. Was he working as the president's lawyer? Was he working as a sort of political fixer, which is how a lot of this appears? You know, Giuliani's been all over television and on the phone with reporters trying to explain this, but the question is, how is he going to respond to Congress? They have subpoenaed him, and obviously there are a lot of questions outstanding about him.
So let's read one of these texts, Jeff. This is from Kurt Volker to the U.S. ambassador to the EU. It reads, had breakfast with Rudy, of course Giuliani this morning, teeing up call with Yarmak, this senior Ukrainian official Monday, must have helped. Most important is for Zelensky, that's the Ukrainian president, to say that he will help investigation and address specific personnel issues if there are any. That text is interesting because we now know that the president pushed for the firing of the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine because it seems she wasn't playing ball with this Biden-centered political investigation.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting to me. Countries work together on statements. Any of us who've covered a G7 will know that the different countries involved negotiate and they get what they want in and they agree on something. But in this case, it wasn't a joint statement that they're talking about. That's a Ukrainian statement from the Ukrainian government that apparently is being edited by or influenced by very specifically demands from the U.S. side. And that is unusual.
And to get what they wanted, military assistance, a meeting with the president. Asha Rangappa, from a legal standpoint and a policy standpoint, what is the issue, what is the danger with the president's private attorney playing such a prominent role in a central U.S. foreign policy and national security issue?
I think Molly had it exactly right. I mean, why is he there and what is he doing? Listen, you know, Rudy Giuliani is the private attorney for the president. That means that his interests are solely his client's private interests, and he is here working on an official statement that is ostensibly, you know, supposed to be about the interests of the United States. These can be in conflict, and he's helping to tailor a message that is going to benefit Trump specifically, personally, in the best way possible, which is at odds with what the duty is of these State Department officials. So I think that that's a problem, and it's a major conflict, and it's not clear what his role was in that whole thing.
All right, so some more news here, if you hadn't had enough already. We know already that President Trump mixed domestic politics with foreign policy in Ukraine. Now we know he did the same with China. CNN has learned that during a phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping in just June of this year, Trump raised Joe Biden's political prospects as well as those of Senator Elizabeth Warren, who by then had started rising in the polls. This according to two people familiar with that discussion between Trump and Xi. The White House record of that call, we should note, was later stored in the highly secured electronic system used to house a now infamous phone call with Ukraine's president, and which helped, of course, spark the whistleblower complaint that has led Democrats to now open an impeachment inquiry to Trump. That system, we should note, had in the past been reserved solely for conversations involving highly classified intelligence. Back with our experts here, Asha Rangappa, so a U.S. president speaking to the Chinese president in this instance, again bringing up U.S. domestic politics, and again his staff moving that call to a secret system that even White House officials have restricted access to. Tell us what the significance of that is.
I mean, we see a pattern here, obviously, if someone has missed the pattern so far. He's now bringing up a second potential political rival, someone who, you know, the story for Biden has been, well, you know, people need to investigate corruption. I mean, why is he bringing up every time that he is seeing a potential threat from an internal political rival, he's bringing them up with these foreign governments, and we apparently these conversations are being moved in a place where they are hidden precisely because they are incredibly problematic from, you know, a legal and national security point of view. It's just more of the same. I mean, I don't know how much we need.
I hear you. And Jeff Mason, you've covered this White House for some time. I mean, clearly problematic to the extent that this administration wanted to restrict access to the content of that calls, even within White House staff.
Even within White House staff, indeed. And I think it's worth noting this is coming at a time when the president, when the United States and China are in the middle of very consequential trade talks. So they have been saying, we talked about already with Ukraine, there's no quid pro quo. Well, there can be an impression of, or an indication that, that there's, if you do this, you'll get this. Boy, on the China-U.S. level with regard to trade, that's talking about a lot of money and a lot of, you know, a very, very big deal that both sides are trying to get and are having trouble getting.
I mean, Molly, you'd have to think, and particularly with the president on the White House lawn yesterday saying, again, by the way, China, you should investigate Joe Biden, as those talks are continuing with great consequence for both sides and the global economy, you can imagine China reading that as a, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Can you not? I mean, relevant to the ongoing negotiations.
Absolutely, and I think as Jeff was saying, these trade talks, we've been told for literally years now that the president is pressuring China using these harsh, tough tariffs that are hurting the Chinese economy and government. We've been told that that is all because he wants a fairer deal from the Chinese for American manufacturers. If it turns out that the only thing he wants in return actually is for China to do some kind of, you know, bogus political hit on the Democrats who are running for president, where does that leave all of the American economic interests that he claims that he's helping? Again, there's a potential that there is a conflict between what the president sees as the national interest and what he sees in his own interest, and what is the cost of that, you know, to the American taxpayer, to the American citizen.
Does he sell out
when that is what the president
Does he sell out one of
on.
those key economic interests, which affects farmers, you and me, you name it? Jeff Mason, Molly Ball, Asha Rangappa, thanks to all of you. Coming up in just a few moments, September, a bit below the 145 that was expected. What does this indicate for the strength of the economy?
You buried the lead, Jim. 3.5% unemployment rate, the lowest
in 50 years
since we put a man on the moon. It's a good number. Here's the way to think about this. In order to maintain the unemployment rate where it is each month, we have to generate 95,000 jobs. So anything above that's gravy. So now we're at 3.5%. It's a beautiful thing. And every American who wants a job can get a job, and there's jobs begging out there to be filled. So the thing is, though, I want to make this point, which is really important. This number, even though it's a very good number, should not deter the Federal Reserve from aggressively lowering their rates for one simple reason. Not because the economy is slowing down, but because our dollar is so overvalued, it's killing our exports.
Okay,
and that's hurting manufacturing.
Let's get to that. Job numbers, a good figure this week. Manufacturing numbers, you know, for the first time since 2009, indicating a contraction, that based on the Institute of Supply Management survey. Service sector as well, growing at its weakest point in 3 years. Is that an indication to you that the trade war is weighing on the economy?
No, not at all. It's an indication to me that Federal Reserve policy with the overvalued dollar is hurting our exports, and we know that.
Because you know the manufacturers also point to the trade tensions.
We know that from the data. Q2 data was Exports were down like 2/3 of a point. On the ISM, I love that indicator, but there's a better one now, a more modern one, the market PMI. Basically, it measures more domestic manufacturing, and it was above 50. So bottom line is like 3.5% unemployment. This economy's hitting on all cylinders. There's going to be some months where manufacturing's lower than others. Construction was strong. Transportation was strong, which is encouraging because that's a leading indicator. This economy, under the Trump tax cuts, deregulation, cheap energy, and trade reform, is a great thing.
Okay, I want to get you to some international issues here. As you heard, we have new reporting this morning that President Trump, in a phone call with President Xi in June of this year, promised the Chinese president that he would stay silent on protests in Hong Kong while the trade talks continue. That's a remarkable position for a U.S. president to take, considering our historic support for human rights and democracy.
You assert that as a fact, though, and I read that story carefully. And Jim, from a journalistic point of view,
are you denying that the president made that?
Hang on. I wasn't privy to that phone call, but here's what I do know. That story had sources familiar with the thing? Who are these people?
Well, I know it's a frequent point to go to the sources. We've spoken to multiple sources, and by the way, the president's public comments after that call,
he gave China a
pass. He gave China a pass on us. He said it was an eternal issue.
You assert that. Okay, but that's not a fact and evidence. That's
we also spoke
anonymous sources who want to hurt this president.
We also spoke to spoke to people involved in the follow-up to this.
Bad
Let me give you an example.
I read through that whole story. It was one assertion of fact after another without sourcing. We spoke to the U.S. Counsel for
Hong Kong, who was told twice not to give speeches on Hong Kong by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, following this order from the White House.
Facts and evidence.
It's in the story.
I read your story, Jim. My point is that you've got like two anonymous sources, right? Who are these people?
Well, do you have contradictory evidence on the president making this pledge?
Here's the thing. The media can't just write these news stories based on anonymous sources and then expect the White House to confirm or deny. That's a game we won't play.
I could list to you the number of stories that the news media broke that were later confirmed by public information, or for instance, what we're seeing Kurt Volker say on the Hill now about text messages.
The only thing the president has said publicly, and he said it repeatedly on Hong Kong, that he hopes that there will be a peaceful resolution, and he's very aware of the situation. I've spoken publicly on this, that it's capitalism and freedom, battling communism in the streets of Hong Kong.
I'm surprised you would take this position, because you, for instance,
but you assert a fact and not an evidence. I will not sit here on the set of CNN.
Well, you don't have contradictory evidence, and we spoke to multiple officials.
You don't have the fact and evidence. You can't assert that, Jim, based on anonymous sources. You just can't do that.
We spoke with sources with direct knowledge, and I know that's a frequent.
I
know that's a frequent.
You guys got to stop doing that.
Place for you to go.
Because
I know. You said on Fox Business. You praised Fox Business for covering the Hong Kong protests.
I praised Maria Bartiromo, Lou Dobbs.
Are you disappointed the president hasn't made a public statement in support of the Hong Kong protests?
You're assuming a fact, not an evidence.
Has the president made a public statement?
He said very clearly that he wants a peaceful resolution to that.
He said it was an internal issue, and he encouraged both sides to refrain from.
So what's the point here, Jim?
I'm asking you, are you disappointed the president hasn't made a public statement in support of the protests?
I'm never disappointed in my president.
When you heard the president yesterday call on China to investigate an American, you and I have spoken multiple times about how China breaks international law.
Time out here. Is this like
an
interrogation here? It's like I feel like I'm like Adam Schiff is sitting in front of me. And by the way,
I'm a journalist. I ask questions of Democrats and Republicans every day.
but this is like an interrogation, right? So
it's an interview.
Here's the thing. This is witch hunt part 2. Okay.
The president said on the White House lawn yesterday.
I've sat here for 3 years.
Authoritarian China should investigate an American.
Can I finish?
You have told me many times that China breaks international law. Is it acceptable for a U.S. president
to investigate
an American? I've asked the question.
So my point here is, I've been in this town now for 3 years. We went through witch hunt part 1 for 2.5 years. Adam Schiff sociopath, looked you in the eye and the American people in the eye, said irrefutable evidence of a Russia hoax. Now, hang on, let me just finish. You had your hectoring. Now we have Adam Schiff saying that he doesn't know the whistleblower and everything. And now we find
what the president said. I know that Adam Schiff has become a talking point for Republicans. The president said on the White House lawn yesterday, China should investigate an American.
You talk to the president about this. What I'm telling you is that this is a witch hunt that's hurting the American people. I mean, we have 3.5% unemployment rate. Impeach that.
Peter, you and I have talked about how China is a bad actor repeatedly, and you and I have both
we
covered
agree on that,
We've covered China for years.
And would you grant me the fact that this president is the greatest president in history standing up to China? Standing up to China? Who else has stood up to China, Jim?
I have.
Would you admit that?
I have said publicly that the
woman who was sitting in this chair,
of course, is an issue.
That woman who was sitting in this chair says that the president is standing up to China for something other than the American people.
Before we go, will someone like you has called out China for breaking the law? Will you comment at all on your president calling on authoritarian China to investigate an American citizen?
No, look, this is a witch hunt. No, I'm not letting it stand. I don't want to go into this. It's like, this is the problem here. We've got a great economy. This president's doing a great job, and all you guys want to do is drag him down into some mud. It's with anonymous sources. Who are these anonymous sources, Jim? How come you never have them on the set?
Do you have any contradictory information that the president made this pledge?
I was not privy to that call, but what I can tell you is this.
Have you ever raised investigating Joe Biden with China during trade negotiations?
What I can tell you is this. Can I tell you this? Okay. I've read probably over 100 stories in 3 years, which were based on anonymous sources, which simply had fake news in them and inaccurate information. So I saw that story break last night, and I thought it was irresponsible journalism. I urge everybody to go read that story and see how many times you can find an actual source in there.
Have you ever raised investigating Joe Biden or his son during your contacts with Chinese officials?
Me, personally? Yeah. Now, here's the thing. I will never talk about what happens inside the White House, okay? Not confirm or deny, because that's the slippery slope. Let me ask you this, Jim.
Hang on.
Let me ask you this.
Let me ask you this. In the trade negotiations?
Let me ask you this. How is it that a U.S. president going forward is ever going to be able to have a candid conversation with a foreign leader about any sensitive matter if the jackals are always wanting to get things revealed? You guys want every transcript revealed of everything. And by the way, the president putting stuff in a secure server now based on all the leaks that have come from that White House. I'd put everything in a secure server.
But just before we go, I'll just give you the opportunity. Have you ever raised investigating Joe Biden or his son in Chinese negotiations?
Have you ever given me a source that's other than anonymous for any of this crap?
Listen,
that's what I want to know.
Okay? Read the story and tell me if you have contradictory information.
3.5% unemployment rate.
I'll give it up to you. If you have contradictory information about Trump making that pledge, you're welcome back on the show.
What I'm asking is, like, stop writing these irresponsible stories that are single sourced from anonymous people.
Do you not single source, multiple sourced?
Two sources.
Stand by the
Two anonymous sources.
Peter, listen, it's always good to have you on.
It's fun.
When you have an answer to the questions as opposed to attack on the reporting,
I am answering the questions that I think are appropriate, Jim.
All right. Appreciate you taking the time. We'll be right back. We'll give you updates as we hear more. Meanwhile, Ukraine's prosecutor general today said the country will review all high-profile cases handled by the previous prosecutor general, and that, crucially, could include the investigation of a natural gas company linked to Joe Biden's son, Hunter. Of course, this comes as explosive new text messages show that U.S. diplomats pressured Ukraine to investigate the Bidens, even though there is no evidence of any wrongdoing by either man. Prosecutor General says he's just trying to uphold the country's rule of law, not to grant political favors to the U.S. Our senior international correspondent, Sam Kiley, he was at that news conference this morning. He joins me now from Kiev. And Sam, there's an impression here that perhaps the pressure worked, that now Ukraine is doing what the Trump administration wanted. Is that what you're hearing on the ground there?
Well, I think, Jim, to be fair to the Ukrainians, they insist that they've got a war on. Remember that the east of this country has been carved off effectively by rebels backed by Russia. Russian troops have invaded periodically, and that is their focus. They see this as very much a distraction, but I did put it directly to the Prosecutor General this morning. I asked him what his reaction was to Donald Trump's demands yesterday that the Bidens should be investigated. And this is how he responded, Jim.
My reaction is calm and professional. The prosecutor office is outside of politics. We will audit and review all historical cases delivered by the previous prosecutor office. If we find that some decisions were illegal, we will review those cases.
Now, essentially what he's saying there, Jim, is, yeah, we're reviewing all of the corruption cases that relate